think we'll get started. We kind of did this pretty impromptu. Wanted to start by just kind of talking about what this event is going to be. This is going to be a recurring event, Cash Flow Advisory Live. One of the core, or some of the core pillars that we've had for our company, and you'll have to excuse me if I'm shifting my face around here because I got my big screen, got my notes on one side and everybody else is sitting here. Some of our core pillars here at Helm are always about education and support and kind of helping lift up the community. It's not just all about the app. We've always said that Helm itself is a great tool, but we're just kind of helping people use their brain power to actually help out their clients. So we've worked with a lot of other professionals in our accelerator program, one of our education courses, and one of the big lifts that they've seen in that is some of the one-on-one coaching that we've had with them and the meetups that we've had every single month with them. And so we decided to kind of take that to the general public. So that's why we're really excited about this program and what it'll become. It's going to be pretty rough and raw today, so excuse me if it's a little bit too rough, but we just kind of invented it in the last few weeks. So we'll see how it goes. And really it's kind of a grassroots kind of push to really kind of build up the community around cash flow advisory, cash flow forecasting, and cash flow management, because we still see a lot of misnomers and misguidance and uncertainty and lack of knowledge around the space in terms of how things should be done and what should be done and this, that, the other. So, we're really looking forward to kind of continuing this. It's going to be recurring every 2 weeks. And of course, I'm going to wreck that because I'm on vacation next week. So this first one's actually going to be 3 weeks from now. I'm not going to apologize, though. It's been a while since I've been on a vacation. So that said, the next event will actually be happening March 16th. We don't have a topic yet, but we'll be announcing that at some point in the future through email and social media. So keep an eye out for that. And, hopefully everyone enjoys this event, and, please feel free to give us feedback because, we're kind of building this as we go, so to speak. So more information and more feedback we get from everybody, the better. Really want this to be more of a community event and, advisors and professionals helping each other. We're kind of here just kind of guiding people more so than anything else. So that said, the typical agenda for these events is going to be some form of education piece up front. We'll look to do for about 15 to 30 minutes of some form of topic each time, and then have Q&A sessions, like interactive dialogue as a group around, throughout the conversation, but as well as after. And so the whole point of it, again, is almost like a ad hoc mastermind class, I guess, is what it's going to end up to be, hopefully. So we'll go through the education piece first, and then we'll have a more fulsome Q&A session at the end of it. We'll try to keep it under an hour. I tend to talk a lot. That's why Selena's here. Really kind of keep me under control. And we'll go from there. So that said, if you have any questions, hello, Mike. Thank you for joining us there. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them out in the chat, and we'll try to answer them as we go, or potentially, after we kind of go through each section. Mike, what's the weather like where you're at? Everybody else is filling us in.
Warm for the first time in a few months, so I'll take it.
Winning.
Right? I can settle for that.
There you go. So today, the topic that we kind of wanted to start out with in terms of the education piece up front would be identifying people that need cash flow advisory services. How do you do that? What do they look like? All of that fun stuff. So we're going to run through industries and businesses that are typically a little more cash flow sensitive, and what do those look like? We'll talk about what to actually look for in specific companies, and we'll actually talk about what business owners in those companies actually talk about, because it's typically not what we're looking at. And we'll talk about who the best clients are in terms of cash flow advisory. So we'll run through those topics. And again, if you have any questions, throw them up in the chat and we'll answer them as we go. Any commentary, feedback, just shoot it out there and we'll see where this goes. So hopping right into it, one of the reasons that we're starting with this topic is because it's tax season. And so that means that you're probably hating your life right now. And if you're not, it probably means that you will be hating your life very shortly. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Rush deadlines, all the stuff that people missed getting you, all of that fun stuff, and trying to get it all done. feel free to shout out "yup" if that's the case, but I'm assuming by the head bobs that that's the case. Except for Dan. Dan's a no. Good for Dan.
I got out of tax.
Nice. Perfect. Good for you, Dan. So all joking aside, the reason that we really wanted to start with that is because a lot of people outside of Dan are in that headspace right now. And really there's three things that gives you at this point in time in terms of identifying people that are probably well suited for cash flow advisory. And that's, you have their attention and you have access to up-to-date books. And the third thing is you have their attention. And so you're probably going to look at me a little weird saying, well, you said have your attention twice, but that's on purpose. The first, you have their attention, really centers around you have their attention in terms of engagement and pain. You know, it's tax season. They need their books done. They need their tax filings done. And so for a lot of people out there, in terms of professionals, this is a really great time for people to, you know, be engaged and get their books up to speed. They need something from you. You can do it, and you can actually not leverage it because that sounds really bad, but they're actually looking for something for you or from you. And so this is a great opportunity in terms of, you know, going through what they've got and identifying their pain. They're highly engaged. You also have access to up-to-date books because, you know, as we all know, that's probably one of the hardest parts about anything that we do is data incoming, trying to get receipts back up, however you do it, whether a client does it or you do it. It's really hard to have up-to-date books. And so out of any time during the year, if they need their taxes done, this is likely to be one of the best times to have really up-to-date information. And so that's the access to up-to-date books. You know, that said, it's maybe a little bit unfair. You know, my firm, we've got pretty much up-to-date books all the time. But kind of the point here is that when somebody has a pain point and they're highly engaged with you, it's a really good time to get their books up to speed, you know, really highlight that to them, because anything to do with cash flow advisory is garbage in, garbage out. And if you don't have up-to-date books, you're never going to have a good high quality product coming out the back end. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of not only identify clients, but actually do the work for them. And so the second, have your client's attention, is really around, you know, you've got your clients engaged and their books are up to speed, but they're also highly primed from a marketing standpoint. And that's really important because I'm not talking about gouging them or any of the sort, but you're really dialoguing with them as a trusted advisor. And so they've got a pain, they need their taxes done. You probably have their books up to speed or will be getting their books up to speed. And they're literally talking to you quite a bit, hopefully right now, in terms of, you know, advice that they need from you. They need their taxes done. They need to know what they're going to get paid. Maybe they need some planning done. They're really in a good state or frame of mind in terms of being receptive to probably some different service offerings. So great example to highlight your opportunity of highlight the full range of your services to them, and the full range of your skills and your abilities. You know, again, they're highly receptive to you. So as an example, you know, you're going through Johnny's accounting and files and you see a few ways that you can save them money. It's a great way and a perfect time to present them with those potential opportunities that you find. Again, you know, they're thinking, oh man, I got to pay this bill. What does that look like? It's a really good opportunity for you to identify different solutions for them. And to be clear, I'm not saying from a cash flow advisory space that you actually do a cash flow forecast right now. Again, this is all about identifying clients that need cash flow advisory and really kind of how you're approaching that and identifying that, approaching it, and then essentially just talking to them about it. So don't do the work. You know, I do want to be clear on that because, you know, when we do talk to a lot of people, their first inclination is, oh, well, I got to do a cash flow forecast and then maybe they'll pay me for it. I really don't like that. It's, you know, you're providing a really high value add service for free at that point in time. And it's probably the best way to devalue what you do. Again, keep in mind that your client right now is highly primed, willing to talk to you. You're speaking to them quite a bit. It's a really good opportunity across the board just to talk about what their future life could look like. They're going to be extremely receptive to it. So again, tax season is a great time for identifying cash flow advisory clients that might need the service because they're extremely engaged. Their books are probably up to date, and they're really primed to value your opinion and your insights. So, I'd kind of like to throw it out there right now. Does anyone on the meeting right now actually have a formal process for reviewing their client files and potentially not upselling them? I don't really like that term, but actually highlighting other value-added services that you have as part of that process. No, Mike, really? I'm sorry, I'm just picking on you. Well, it's a good thing to know, because it's exactly what I'm talking about. Is you're doing all of the work right now. And I think a really good thing to highlight is when you're looking at doing advisory, I don't like the term advisory, to be clear. Advisory is a really good catch-all term that people like to shove down professionals' throats in terms of you need to do this to make more money. I actually don't believe that's true. Like Michael, I know you're into a lot of tax, and tax in of itself is advisory. This is just another tool that you can use with your clients. And so kind of what I'm saying is if it's a tool that you want to use in your tool set, this is a really good opportunity if you're doing taxes or bookkeeping prep for the accountant for taxes or whatever that looks like. It's a really good opportunity to just go through the client's file, really get to know their numbers, pinpoint, some of these people that do have cash flow sensitivities, and then just talk to them about it. And you'll be surprised 9 times out of 10 what that looks like in terms of, the receptiveness to it. So that said, we will continue on. So in terms of identifying clients, we know that they're in a great position in terms of their books and their state of mind in order to talk about these kinds of services, but how do we actually identify them? And so if you have a huge client list, even if you don't, a good starting point is to really look at industries. Identifying industries and businesses that are cash flow sensitive, because if you have that frame of mind or a little bit of a framework in place as you're doing some of this work for your clients, you can keep that in the back of your mind or actually put it into an actual process. And kind of as you go through the work, you're better able to identify these clients that might actually need this help. So before we kind of get into the thick of it there, I really do want to differentiate between industries and businesses, and we can identify them almost the same way, but they are different. The reason that I say that is because you can have a cash flow sensitive business that is operating within a really good stable industry. So to use a really extreme example, you could be a really distressed bank within the finance industry. Probably not going to happen, but it could. And the whole point there is that you can have really good industries, but poor companies within it. And you can have the exact opposite, where you could have really poor industries and extremely stellar companies within it. So we do really want to be careful that while we're using industries and kind of a framework to narrow down our focus to identify clients that need cash flow advisory, it's not a catch-all. It's not perfect. It is just that. It's just a framework that you can use to kind of narrow your focus, so to speak. So that said, if you do have a lot of clients, starting with industry first is a great way to do it, because that'll just kind of help you target the people that you should spend a little more time at as you're doing your additional work. Because again, you don't want to go through every single client, go through all of their files. It'd be extremely tedious and you'd probably lose your mind. So I wouldn't suggest doing that. So industries first, go down to specific companies and really narrow your focus. I know when I'm talking industries, I'm actually talking more like a true vertical. And what I mean by vertical is you're trying to group companies by commonalities. And so these commonalities would, essentially be tied to cash flow sensitivities. So what are some common traits or some commonalities that could help us identify verticals that might be cash flow sensitive? This list is not exhaustive. I just kind of jotted this down even yesterday, but off the top of my head, there's industries that have a lot of projects, industries that have significant lead times with COGS, industries with significant waiting times on receivables, seasonality, and high growth rates. Those are 5 really good ones. So when I'm talking about projects, we're talking about industries or businesses that have not consistent revenue streams or incoming cash flows. We're talking about big, chunky, lumpy incoming payments down the road. And there's a huge problem with that, obviously, because if your incoming cash flow looks like that, your outgoing cash flow, meaning your pay, your salaries, any kind of costs you have are actually a little more even. And so you've got a really big mismatch in terms of inflows and outflows right there. So those industries or companies within those industries are really sensitive to cash flow. So a really good place to look. Examples of businesses or verticals that would fit within a project-based kind of trait or commonality would be creatives. So marketers, designers, architects, all of these people have really big project costs, but ongoing salaries, wages, rent, all of that fun stuff. Construction industry, because typically when you build a house, you get paid on progress draws or completions of work. So that's another example. Nonprofits would actually be another good example of something with project-based inflows. And that would go with their grants, anything that they have to do around that. Like it's very project-based and project focused, as opposed to say, a retail chain or a retail store where you have X number of people coming in the door, and you can pretty much guarantee that at a base level, you will have this much cash flow incoming every single day. So project-based businesses or verticals are a really good focus point. Creatives and designers and architects, I think, are really good ones to focus on. They've got a lot of cash flow needs from my experience. Another commonality that we mentioned was significant lead time on COGS. And so I kind of use the COGS as kind of a catch-all term. I'm really kind of talking about purchases. So Todd, I know you're familiar with this, but like e-commerce is a great example. All of these companies have a really big cash flow mismatch in terms of we have to buy X product 90 to 120 to whatever days in advance. And in doing that, you've got to outlay your cash, sit on your product, and then sell it down the road. And so that creates obvious cash flow implications. You're essentially carrying a lot of risk in terms of the costs that you're having to carry. So anything similar to that would be, would also kind of fit within this vertical. Manufacturing would be a good example. Furniture business. I've talked to a few advisors and professionals and accountants that do furniture businesses, and they've got a lot of cash flow issues in terms of the timing and the lead times around, buying the product, building it out, and then actually selling it in their retail chain. One of the other commonalities that we were talking about, significant wait times on receivables. It seems a little bit simplistic, but it is really true. Like if you look at the construction industry, again, I can't count how many times I've talked to a construction business where they talked about their bad debts or not getting paid for a job, or having significant delays on getting paid on their job. It's really apparent in that industry, long lead times and essentially getting paid. Service industries like lawyers and accountants and bookkeepers, there's a lot of professionals out there that still don't have it nailed down in terms of how they provide their services. So accountant as a prime example, a traditional accountant will go out, they'll do their hourly billing, they'll send out their invoice late. Lawyers are probably worse for this, I think, but then you sit there and you wait for somebody to pay you. I mean, those are the kinds of businesses that you really want to look for. If you know of any businesses that have that kind of a trait, they're going to have a lot of cash flow sensitivities, again, because you've got unnecessary risk in terms of carrying your costs again. Uncertainty on when you're actually receiving money, if at all, but certainty on the costs or the cash outflows. The fourth trait that we kind of discussed there was seasonality. Here you can think of hospitality, tourism, event planning. We had a customer last year that we talked to them about the event planning and how they were impacted not only by COVID, but seasonality and fires. And it was extremely interesting how affected that business would be. And, essentially what you're dealing with is an issue with ramp there. So, you might have enough cash to tide yourself through the lull, but there's two problems. You got through the lull, but how do you get back to the peak? Because now you've got a period of ramp and your costs are going to increase. And if you don't get paid on time, you can't keep pace with that ramp. And so that in of itself is another issue. So you got to have enough cash to live through the trough, but also accelerate back out with the ramp and the growth of whatever your busy season is. And that kind of ties in with the the fifth, the fifth commonality that I was talking about, which is high growth rates. Tech firms are probably the easiest example here, where you've got a company with low to no revenues, but extremely high cost and the expectation of extremely high growth. And so that kind of ties in with the trait that we were talking about with seasonality, where it's you trying to contain the ramp up, and how much money and cash you need in order to sustain that growth and keep pace with it. And so again, this list of 5 that Selena was kind enough to list out in the chat there, it's not exhaustive at all, but you can see just running through the examples that once you have these, it's pretty easy to pick out industries or verticals that kind of have these traits that help you identify potentially clients within that. So then you can take those, look at your client list and say, this client's an event planner, this client's, a lawyer, this client's a construction. You can start to pick them out a little bit easier. Because again, what we're trying to do here is give you a little bit of a framework that as you're going through and doing the work, it helps you identify some clients here. You can use this same approach for single businesses. If you don't have a huge client list, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with actually going through and looking at your client list exactly with this kind of a framework. So it works exactly the same way. Appreciate that this is all maybe a little bit too subjective, but again, we're kind of coming with the context that people are going through work for clients right now, kind of in bulk, getting their books up to speed. So it gives you a really good frame of mind for what you should be looking for to help those clients out potentially in different ways. So I'm going to flip it back to the Q&A again, if anybody has any. And if you don't, I'm going to throw it out there. Does anyone else have any other broad kind of cash flow sensitivities that they think they could segment some of their clients with? Nope.
Oh, yeah. I'll give some. We're heavy in the nonprofit space, and people often outside of it think of it in terms of like just one industry vertical, but we've got, we differentiate it between kind of grant funded organizations, rare disease advocacy. We've got some cultural institutions that have memberships and year-end giving, and then festivals and events. And so the revenue streams and the cash flow gets really lumpy for those types of organizations as well. Membership organizations, if they're not straight line throughout the year on their membership, if they send out all their membership billings in January, then they're going to be really lumpy too. So we see that across that segment, but just it plays out in different ways.
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. Anybody else have some examples of some of their experience with lumpiness? I think that it's a terrible term, but it's actually a really good one to explain cash flow issues, because that's really what you're trying to look for. I mean, if you've got an extremely stable business with stable inflows and outflows, it's the exact opposite of lumpiness, and you do not have a cash flow issue, assuming that you're actually making money at that point. Maybe that's a big assumption, but I think lumpiness is a really good way to frame it, because that lumpiness is created by either the business itself or how you receive your timing, in terms of how you're collecting or paying your bills. Anybody else? No. All right. Well, we'll keep on rocking and rolling here. So in terms of looking at specific companies, we've talked about how to narrow down our client list and to those that might need cash flow advisory through, industries and then specific companies. But how do you actually determine, once you think you've got a few clients that you should look at, how do you actually look at them and say, yeah, these people need it? Good way to do it is to simply look at their balance sheet. It's probably a little bit of a different comment that you might expect from me, because I'm very focused on P&L and actual future looking cash flow. But the balance sheet is where things go to die. It's a really good frame of reference in terms of what has happened in the past. And so it's a very quick way to identify people that might be distressed, essentially. So if you see that somebody's relying on a line of credit quite consistently over time, that's definitely a good trigger, a good flag. as opposed to a good use of line of credit would be sporadic use. You need to go buy a piece of equipment or get through a lull. That would be a healthy use. But if you're essentially maxing out your line of credit all the time, it's just a term loan that's disguised as a line of credit. Low working capital. There's no magic ratio here. A healthy range, as everybody says, is 2 to 1. But essentially, if you have low working capital, it's probably an indication that you're trying to deal with some kind of cash flow sensitivities or struggles over time. See you, Mike. Thanks for hopping in. And low cash reserves. We're talking here about buffer and runway, for those businesses that maybe only have a month or two of kind of expenses and reserves, which is most businesses, to be honest. I think the average is 27 days for everybody. Low cash reserves are a really good example of being a little bit stressed out with cash flow. And they probably have high long-term debt loads, relatively speaking. So, not everybody can get traditional financing and term loans, but it is a really good indication that if they're, again, maxing these out and consistently going back for more debt relative to what their operations look like, it probably means that they're struggling with cash flow issues. So really all it says is that all of these things they're taking on a little more risk through debt than they might otherwise need to. And it's probably because they're compensating for some cash flow issues. And so, we've all done it and seen it. I've done it myself, where you keep carrying an additional cost longer than you want to, just in case, or because you've got some expectation that's going to happen in the future. Clients are the same. They'll keep that cost ongoing with the expectation that it will work out. And sometimes it doesn't. And then that just means that you've accumulated additional cost, and that has to be offset with either cash or debt or something. So really good telltale signs just by looking at the balance sheet. Of course, once you kind of have that framework in mind, you can go straight to the P&L, quickly back out some of the non-cash charges like depreciation and accruals. And if they consistently are, negative in terms of cash flow, that's a pretty good indication that they've got some issues that they probably need help with. Now, the interesting part is that your clients probably aren't going to talk to you about it in terms of, hey, my working cap's low. Hey, I've got negative cash flow. They probably aren't even aware of these issues. And even if they were, they probably don't know how to talk about them. And secondly, they might, even if they do know all of those things, they might not actually talk to you about them, a professional, simply because there's still a lot of people out there that look at accountants and bookkeepers as being very siloed and doing specific tasks. Bookkeepers only do data entry, accountants only do tax returns. And so they might not be aware of the value-added services that you're offering, depending on how you're marketing and positioning yourself. And so again, this goes back to, what your clients at the very beginning, talking about the accessibility to their books and them being primed and fully engaged, goes straight back to that. Your clients are in a great spot and very receptive to talking to you right now in terms of prepping everything for their tax returns. And so talking to them about what you can do for them at this point in time would be a really good idea. So things that your clients might say instead of talking to you about, pretty hard metrics, might be a little more nuanced. So they might say, hey, it's been a good year, but I'm not sure why my bank account's so low. They might say, hey, things are growing, but I wish I had more money to buy X, Y, Z. And they might even talk a little bit more emotionally. It was a hard year. I'm lucky that COVID supports were in place. Hey, it's a grind. I didn't think running my business would be so hard. Or just straight up, I'm not sure how I'm going to make it. In each one of those cases, those people are actually talking about cash flow issues. And so those are definitely key trigger points that you can use to, essentially identify the client and help them out. So essentially, as professionals, we've got multiple different data points that we can look at. We can look at the cash flow sensitivities, the commonalities that we discussed. We can look at the balance sheet and some of the symptoms or effects of troubled cash flow. And we can also look at the dialogue that we've had with our clients, the thoughts and the feelings that they convey to us. And if you know all of these, that will allow you to identify those people that need cash flow advisory. So that being said, I'd love to throw it out there. Has anyone heard any kind of emotional terms that their clients have or have said to them in the past? something that might kind of keyed off that people are in cash flow trouble. So Deb said for sure. Can you share that example? Love to hear it.
I'll turn my mic on. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you great.
Yeah. Yeah, I have one client that is, quite honestly, he's kind of been MIA from the business, and I've been kind of holding it together. And I'm actually this week looking at doing some cash flowing for them, just because he doesn't seem to have a handle on where things are at. And then, yeah, it was like, wow, last year wasn't a great year, and what's going on here? So, and I've already discussed with him things that he's paying for that he shouldn't be paying for.
Yeah. What business line is he in?
They do furniture refinishing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a tough business, but yeah, we've got to do some work on the accounting side of things.
Yeah. Yep. It's not an uncommon story, right? Like you always unblur my camera there. Yeah, there's always some catch-up work that needs to be done in order to get people up to speed. That's why I say, it's not just tax season, but any other time where your client has a pain and they're fully engaged, it's a really good opportunity to talk about cash flow at this point in time. So, I mean, it sounds like you're in one of those situations right now. Okay. So we've kind of given you a framework for identifying clients who need cash flow advisory, but I'd also like to talk about who the best clients are for cash flow advisory. And this is a little bit of a favorite one of mine, because everything that we just talked about, those sometimes are not the best clients that need cash flow advisory. Like essentially, everybody always talks about cash flow advisory in terms of distress. But the reality is those people that are probably the best for cash flow advisory clients are probably the exact opposite of that. These are companies that probably are in stable industries or extremely stable businesses. They've got little to no debt. They probably have high cash reserves, and they probably don't have a lot of negative thoughts or feelings around their business or about their life and how those two intertwine. And so I love highlighting this, because those people are probably the ones that are going to value cash flow advisory services the most, because having too much cash is a real issue. No one gets into business to not pay themselves. And everybody does get into business to, further their personal life in some way, shape, or form, whether it's their passion or they want to go travel or spend more time with their kids. Really helping those clients manage their cash flow position and maximize the return on their investment, like their business, is a really, really, really big thing. It's an amazing business line to go after. And the best part is that they have the financial position to value it more. And they've also likely been around business enough and have seen enough things in business, highs and lows, peaks and troughs, that they know the true value of that kind of work in itself. So even having the conversation with those clients is extremely different, because they value it almost instantaneously. So how do you find those clients? Well, take the last, 35 minutes of what we were talking about and throw it all away, or at least flip it on its head and do the exact opposite of that. Essentially find all of the clients that fit outside of everything that we just talked about. And those will be the really good clients, and probably your best clients in terms of the, working with them, the value add and the pricing that you can receive from it. So that's my rant on that. That's kind of it, in terms of the education piece. So we'll kind of open it up the floor completely and see what kind of questions people have, if any. Todd, you got any questions?
Well, it's kind of interesting that your last comment definitely resonated, because, the clients that can pay for cash flow advisory are typically the ones that may not have an immediate pain, or at least are more managing it better. So I think you're looking for somebody who's not managing it so well that they're like, oh, there's plenty of cash, I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But thinking, it's that client who says, well, there's too much cash. That's interesting. because, those clients do exist.
Yes, they're actually, in my experience, they're a little more frequent than people even think. Through my years of practice, it's not everybody, but I have seen enough clients that hoard cash in the company because they're scared of a bank, as an example, or they just simply don't know what to do with it, or they don't want to pay the extra tax. There's so many reasons that a client might keep cash in their corporate entity as opposed to paying it to themselves directly, depending on their situation. Or maybe it's their personal selves that they're keeping the cash in. The reality is there's a lot of people that hoard cash instead of actually using it effectively. And so showing those people what they could do with that cash is a really good value add. And I really love the point, because almost everybody thinks of cash flow forecasting and cash flow advisory as distressed companies and how do you help them out of it. And my experience is that, not everybody needs cash flow forecasting and cash flow management advisory, but a significant portion of everybody does need it or could use it. And those people that have a lot of cash on hand actually could value it a lot more, because you can show them an actual tangible ROI in terms of cash in their hands. And that's extremely impactful. If you can show a cash flow forecast, regardless of the tool that you use, for somebody to, here's what your bank account could look, your personal bank account could look like, here's what we can pay you. And if it's, 20-30% more than what it used to be without actually affecting the company in a material or significant way, there's huge value in that. And it's really interesting. It kind of goes back to, we always talk about cash flow forecasting. There's two segments. There's the controllership and CFO services. And, CFO, I always look at, past 1 year. It's more strategic, it's more thought out, it's more, how do I go after those big audacious goals? Whereas the controllership piece, it's more the short term, and it's the stick handling and the actual driving the bus, so to speak, and really helping people manage their business. And I think there's a lot of value add that can be had there.
Calvin, I know that in our other conversations that we've had, how do people prepare for objections or overcome those objections if people are like, well, I don't have the money to pay for this because I'm stressed out and I'm in debt. So I can't, even though yeah, it might help me, but I can't pay you more to do more.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a conversation that people need to be prepared for, and there's a point where it might actually not work. I'm just laughing at Dan's comment because everybody wants to be called a fractional CFO. That's true. And nobody knows what a controller is. I think that's a really good point in terms of the objection handling. I think firstly, people need to understand that professionals need to understand that there can be the point that people just simply can't afford it. So you do need to understand that if somebody's so cash strapped that it might not actually work for them. But not everybody's in that situation, and there is a very large chunk of the business population that, if you show and can do a cash flow forecast for someone and show the effects of the benefits that you could do over time, those benefits should outweigh the cost of what you're providing. And assuming that people are thinking rationally, that should be a very easy decision for them to make. And so the key piece there would be, how do you talk to somebody rationally when they probably are a little bit stressed out and emotional around things? And I think that's just more a case of your presentation and really trying to stay objective with that person, and really acknowledging their emotions, showing empathy for the situation that they're in. I fully appreciate that you're in this bad situation, and I fully understand that it hurts and you can't see a way out, but here is a way out. This is a legitimate way out. If you cut $500 off your software subscription bills, this will occur. If you can increase your sales by advertising here and it costs this will occur. If you can show empathy and get them a little less emotional so that they can see the rational argument, I think it makes it a lot easier. And that's a very subjective statement that I just said, and it does take work, and it's not an art per se, but I think it's more so the professional also accepting that you know, that objection isn't the person saying typically that they don't want it. Usually when someone says I can't afford it, it means that they want to, they just don't know how. You know, if somebody didn't want your service, they're just going to tell you no. And so you have to kind of flesh that out a bit and dig a little bit more. So, you know, be prepared to just ask a few more questions, show empathy and ask a few more questions and really dig into the person's situation and highlight what could be done. Any other questions that people had? Any comments?
Yeah, what you said kind of resonates with the client I was previously talking about. He got his year-end financials. It was like, oh, it wasn't a great year. And I've been at him for years to cancel some monthly subscriptions. And you know how First Data gets their hooks into you, and it's like breaking up with the mafia. And when he saw his financials, I said, well, you know, if you would just get this thing canceled, you would have saved like $600 last year.
Yeah.
He was on it that week. After years of me nagging him about it, he finally saw, you know, that dollar figure, you know, that was the message that he needed in order to get some action on it.
Yep, that's right. I usually look at cash flow advisory, you know, I think you just framed it up perfectly. A lot of people always wonder, well, what is it and what does it look like? Like you just described it. You had a solution already for your client. You saw their pain. You lived it and breathed it. You knew exactly what to do. And so cash flow advisory is just mapping that out into the future and showing it to them and really helping them guide down that path and then making sure that it actually happens. Because of course that second step is also pretty key, because it's one thing to show somebody the path. It's another thing to actually walk down that path. And some people need help, you know, so even in your situation where you were on your client and really harping on them, you know, you're helping guide them down that path. That sounded a little preachy, probably.
Are there any like red flags that people should be watching out for, like people that you should really avoid, or industries or companies that you should avoid?
In terms of industries, I don't think there's any industry specifically that you should ever really avoid. And this is just my opinion. There's probably industries that you probably don't want to work for. But I would kind of extend that and say there's probably clients that you don't want to work for. And that's more of a general practice standpoint where, you know, when you're first starting out, you take as much business as you can get. You probably take on clients that you typically wouldn't. And so as you grow and you can weed those people out, it typically makes your life better. And some people don't. Some people keep those clients and they continue on with them. But I would say those are the clients that you probably don't want to work for in terms of quote unquote higher level cash flow advisory, because you know your pain in the ass, so to speak, excuse my French, clients, those are the ones that, you know, they don't value your services. And if they don't value your services already, they probably won't be valuing your cash flow advisory services or any other advisory services. And so those would be the red flags. And Dan says, just for fun, cash flow management. Yes. If there was an industry that would be difficult, cash flow management for cannabis would be a huge one, simply because they've got a lot of restrictions around them. I can't count how many payment providers I've talked to that have been shut down because of cannabis industry related associations, which I find extremely interesting. It would be a very hard business line to be in. I don't know if that means that it's a client you wouldn't work for, though. As an example, it just means they've actually got a lot of cash management issues they need help managing. Dan just keeps on rolling. High pricing. That was a good one, Dan. I actually like that.
For those for those
no,
business,
we need to co-host this. Come on. I like this. Dan just said, so people can hear or see on the video, Kelvin will never let me in again. Rolling. I didn't even catch that one.
Oh yeah.
Rolling.
It's like people that are stable, are they like saying anything? Like you talk about the pain points that, you know, someone who's stressed out might be saying, like the emotional things that they might be saying, but without looking into somebody's books, would you be able to identify that they're like a stable business that could use cash flow advisory?
Yeah, you know, when we were talking about what distressed companies essentially would be talking about, they would be talking negative in tone and, you know, a little bit stressed out essentially in their train of thought. Stable businesses would not be talking that way. Like it would be very rare for you to be talking to a client in a stable business that would say, man, my life sucks right now. Like it's going to have more of a positive bias to it. And they're going to be talking more positively, emotionally. They might be to the point where it's like, man, I should figure out what to do with this cash, but I've never heard that in my lifetime. so there are clients out there that still need that help and just don't know it. But the reality is that most people that are running, you know, stable, really well-run businesses, they could still use controllership and guidance, you know, that cash flow forecasting, cash flow management piece. They will be talking just simply more positively. So, you know, and that's the trigger in of itself, right? You know, the trigger for distressed companies was negative tone and connotation, and the trigger for stable and positive businesses is exactly that, positive commentary. So, you know, hey, it was a great year and we're hoping for 20% more growth next year. And even that in itself, you know, when people are starting to talk really high growth rates, that's a really great trigger, because that'll tell you that you need to focus on those people because they'll need help managing that. Again, seasonality, high growth companies, they need help managing the increase in costs, and depending on how their cash inflows work, matching their costs to their inflows. So, you know, I would say the way people talk, if they're talking positive, they'll still need help. If you look at their balance sheets and you can see exactly where, you know, their bank accounts are at, their line of credits, their debt loads, that's more of the trigger. It's a little more quantitative because, you know, not everybody's going to be talking positive. There's probably going to be less people talking positively than negatively, to be frank. And that's just, I'm speaking from experience. Maybe I have a really bad client list.
Well, it's been a rough 2 years, so.
Yeah, well, even before that, it's, you know, I always love the graphs of entrepreneurship where it's, you know, it's not a straight line, it's up and down and up and down and up and down. So most people that you talk to, even though they're doing extremely well, are just tired, burnt out. And this is even pre-COVID, you know, trying to deal with lots of work. Like all of those are, you know, they're all related to you having the ability to help that person run their business, because, you know, lack of time in of itself is another flag that you could use to, you know, help people out. If you're in the business of helping them run their business, save them some time.